Beep, beep, beep. Morning. How are you? Well, it's coming up to Warrior Week. So I'm very excited about teaching all the good peeps, which is my favorite time of the month. So that's coming up now. I've got a really interesting article. Oh, subscribe. Blah. Do the usual. Become a warrior teacher. We're starting this coming Thursday. So, come and join us. What the hell? There's a really interesting journal on Sage Journals that I've come across. A really interesting article under clinical psychological science. And the article is called Helping or Harming the Effects of Trigger Warnings on Individuals with Trauma Histories. Right? Now, this trigger warning phenomenon has been around for a while, hasn't it? People go, it's a trigger warning, trigger warning, trigger warning. It's a load of cobblers. Now, any good teacher will tell you that one of the prime teaching principles of, in terms of learning, is called intensity. The intensity of experience is more likely to provide a powerful learning experience in turn. So sometimes it's quite good if you're teaching or if you're doing learning, whatever you're doing, to actually have something come across you and smack you on the back of the head without somebody saying, I'm going to smack you upon the back of the head now. Are you ready? Which is what a trigger warning is, right? So they're abject nonsense. I've always said this since the first time people started talking about them. So I think it's good to be shocked. It's good to be rattled. Get used to it. It's the human condition. It's when we're at our best, when we're rattled and shocked. So the abstract itself says, and this is what I think is quite interesting for you to have a consideration thereof, and let me know what you think as usual in the comments. Trigger warnings alert trauma survivors about potentially disturbing forthcoming content. Their definition of trauma survivors is interesting. We'll come to that, right? Empirical studies on trigger warnings suggest that they are functionally inert or cause small adverse side effects. We conducted a pre-registered replication and extension of a previous experiment, so that they're testing the falsifiability of the experiment. Trauma survivors were randomly assigned to either receive or to not receive trigger warnings before reading passages from world literature. We found no evidence that trigger warnings were helpful for trauma survivors. For participants who self-reported a post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosed as self-reported PTSD, or for participants who qualify for probable PTSD, most people have no idea what PTSD is. Even when survivors trauma matched the passage's content, so even when somebody said it may have been something absolutely dreadful, perhaps in a war situation, or as a result of assault, rape, something terrible, even then they found no evidence that trigger warnings helped, even if the patches matched something that had specifically happened to the individual. That's interesting, isn't it? That's interesting because it just pours water on the whole bloody idea. We found substantial evidence that trigger warnings counter-therapeutically reinforce survivors' view of their trauma as central to their identity, right? So what we're talking about here is people who have garnered victimhood and therefore have become victims, eternal victims, right? Not a victim as in, I was bashed on the head with a brick and somebody stole my bag, right? That's a victim at that moment. Doesn't make me a victim for the rest of my life. What they're talking about here is people who have taken on victimhood as a mantle. So that they take on victimhood as a mantle. They are an ever victim. An ever victim. And that ever victim then usually becomes medically and psychologically unwell anyway, because taking victimhood does that to you. So regarding replication hypotheses, the evidence was either ambiguous or substantially favoured the hypothesis that trigger warnings have no effect. In essence, they're saying that the articles that they looked at, the experiment they've carried out, means that trigger warnings don't work. They're just designed to make you weak. They're designed to make you become part of this victimhood culture, this victimhood mentality that there is an external thing that is going to affect you constantly. In summary, they say simply, we found that trigger warnings are not helpful for trauma survivors. That's fascinating, isn't it? Giving a trigger warning means providing prior notification about forthcoming events that may be emotionally disturbing. In this case, trigger warnings are similar to PG-13 or viewer discretion advised warnings that are common across many different forms of media. Well, I would argue they're not. I think they're a different beast altogether. Saying to somebody that, Gremlins is a 15, Ghostbusters is a PG, and The Exorcist is an 18 is not a trigger warning. Because it doesn't imply that there's content in there that is going to harm you. It just implies that there is content in there that is only suitable for people of a certain age and that you should be cautious about who watches it. It's not a trigger warning. Trigger warning has a specific meaning. It's going to trigger you because of something that's happened to you in the past or something that you're very upset about, so that you're going to get feelings which you then have to deal with. It's absolutely insane, trigger warnings. Absolutely insane. Trigger warnings are distinct in that they originated as a measure of protection specifically for survivors of trauma. For people with post-traumatic stress disorder, viewing reminders of trauma can spark painful re-experiencing symptoms. Trigger warnings originated in online discussion groups for survivors of sexual trauma, in which individuals would warn readers before discussing their experience. Since their inception, trigger warnings have expanded far beyond the boundaries of specialised online communities. Here we go, mission creep. Trigger warnings are now used in educational settings, social media, entertainment and other venues. In addition to their expansion in setting, they have also expanded in scope beyond sexual violence, so that now people can say, "Oh, I'm triggered," so they don't have to do something. It's just to make you a victim, right? Trigger warnings have sparked considerable debate in higher education. Proponents of trigger warnings have emphasised their importance in creating an inclusive atmosphere for disadvantaged groups on campus. That's because those disadvantaged groups are seen by the idiots as weak, right? So if you're black or gay or a lesbian, you're seen as weak and in need of help, and trigger warnings. It's the most awful discrimination. It has been argued at that point that trigger warnings provide agency to engage or not to engage, and that they allow trauma survivors to adequately prepare to engage with difficult material. Get over it. I know it's hard. Trust me, I know. But get over it. It's not how we treat adults. Not how we treat young people. Not how we treat, say you're weak, therefore you need. Critics have suggested that trigger warnings imperil free speech. They do. Academic freedom. They do. And effective teaching. They most certainly do, which prevents students from engaging with challenging material. I know teachers and I know people who work in universities that have changed how they teach. They put stuff on the PowerPoint and go, read that. Now read that. Now read that. Thank you for coming. Because they don't want to engage with these people because they're dangerous, because they're perpetual victims. So therefore they'll go, "Oh, I was triggered by him, therefore I'll make a complaint because he is attacking me because words of violence." Tell them to go screw themselves. Like, honest to God, I can't understand why professors aren't starting online courses like I'm doing. I don't know why they're not doing it. Because then you can tell people to just screw off. Because there's no big organisation behind you. You want to behave like that? You want to behave like you're weak? Then screw off, because we don't do victimhood here. So that's like the warrior teachers. I don't do victimhood here. If you think you're in a safe space, you're living in cloud cuckoo land. It's one of my first things I say. What's the point unless you're going to get challenged? That's the point. All of this is about muting in a kind of psychological equity. Muting everybody to a single line of victimhood and fear. That's what it is. There's a lot more to this. Go and have a read, because I think it's really interesting, particularly for you psychological bods out there, which I am not. I'm a teacher. I have the teaching mindset. You have the psychological mindset. But go and read it anyway, because I think you find it interesting. Let me know in the comments. What do you think? Become a warrior teacher. Please share this. Do the usual. Links in the doobris. All right? I'll catch up with you later, folks. Have a grand day.